problem is the Western Cape is really a line on a map. It was a negotiated province during, arising out of the 1994 negotiations, but it has no history. It has no history that gives it any unique demographic or any unique culture that one could perhaps argue that it is an independent state. The line was drawn. Previously, the Cape included the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape. So if you're going to start talking about the Cape, the Western Cape is a creation of 1994 negotiations, and it has no unique characteristics that justify it being an independent state.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we have with us Brett Herron. Brett is a member of the National Assembly of South Africa, and he's the Secretary General of Good. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on.
Brett, you complain about load shedding or that you have problems with electricity at the moment. You might have problems with electricity in a moment's time. What do you see your party's solution as to the load shedding problem?
Look, I mean, it's not my party's solution. I think it's probably the only solution. If we're going to end load shedding in the short term, so in other words, immediately, we need ESKOM to get its act together and get the existing fleet of coal-powered or coal-fire-powered power stations operating as they are meant to operate. So that's the short-term solution. Is we've got a fleet of power stations. They're not operating and generating the capacity to their capacity. There's a lot of unplanned maintenance. There's a lot of misalignment of maintenance. So parts are breaking down at different times due to their age. So we need to get the current fleet up and running, and then we do really need to start adding in the independent power producers and their generating capacity. But that's going to be a medium-term solution, and part of the just transition ultimately to renewable energy, which will be the cheapest form of energy that we can generate. But for that to happen, the capacity of the grid, so the transmission capacity of ESKOM, needs to be improved. So there's a whole lot of, I think, poor management on the side of ESKOM, which has led us here, including the fact that the grid, the current transmission grid, does not have the capacity to accommodate the additional procurement of energy that the president announced in July last year. He announced that we were going to add 5,200 megawatts in bid window 6. But the grid only has capacity to add 820 megawatts.
And I mean, your leader is the Minister of Public Works, I believe. So obviously she has an inside opinion in all of this. Who do you think is responsible for the current crisis in ESKOM? Is it Gwede? A lot of people like to blame Gwede Mantashe. Is there any one person that's responsible?
Well, I mean, look, this is not, I can't express an opinion on behalf of Patricia de Lille, so I'm expressing our party's position. She's the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, and we don't discuss her cabinet meetings. But it's quite obvious that there's a fragmentation in the leadership of energy supply to South Africans. So, I mean, we have ESKOM as the sole supplier of energy, both directly to customers, but also to municipalities. Then you have municipalities who also transmit energy directly to consumers. And ESKOM resides under the Ministry of Public Enterprises. Then we have the Minister of Energy, who's responsible for the procurement of and leading the country in identifying new forms of energy. So there is a misalignment, I think, in government between the two ministries. But ultimately, as it stands now, the problem is with ESKOM, and you know, the ESKOM has a board and has a CEO, and it has had CEOs and boards before. and they have just not managed the maintenance of their existing fleet properly, and they haven't planned for the increased demand on the grid properly.
Sabotage and ESKOM. How big of a problem is sabotage and ESKOM? Because I've spoken to a lot of people and they say if sabotage were to end tomorrow, I mean, load shedding would end. How big a problem do you think is sabotage at ESKOM?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that sabotage is raised often. I mean, we're yet to see any, as far as I know, any meaningful or large-scale arrests or identification of who the saboteurs are. I can't discount that sabotage may be part of the problem, but there's sabotage in various forms. There's from some of the information I've heard, part of the sabotage is not necessarily sabotaging the equipment, but for example, sabotaging the ability to procure supplies and maintenance and services by not showing up to a procurement meeting, and so there's no quorum for that meeting. So there's different ways to sabotage the supply of electricity. I mean, we know, the rocks that were meant to be coal and those kinds of incidents, but large-scale sabotage to the extent where we are now in stage 6 or fluctuating in and out of stage 6. I'm not convinced that it's only a sabotage thing. And when we think sabotage, we must think larger than just messing with the mechanics of a power station, but also those people who are on bid adjudication committees or procurement committees who don't show up for those meetings in order to collapse the quorum.
Interesting. Brett, what do you see as the differences between your party, Good, and the ANC? Some people accuse your party of being in a de facto coalition with the ANC. Is that true?
No, I mean, Patricia serves in the national cabinet as a leader of as a result of a personal request from the president to her. There's no agreement between Good and the ANC that would constitute a coalition. We're under no obligation to vote with them on any issue in Parliament. We're under no obligation not to contest by-elections against them. And we recently contested an ANC ward in Nyanga, and we contested hard, so hard that they were panicking a little. We contest by-elections against them. We did so in Overtones. So Patricia serving in the national cabinet is also is part of a tradition in the ANC led government since 1994. Every cabinet has had an opposition leader serving in it since 1994. And I don't hear anybody asking the Freedom Front Plus whether they were in a coalition with the ANC when they served in the cabinet. So, I mean, they served in Jacob Zuma's cabinet. But for some reasons, people seem to forget that the ANC has always included an opposition leader in their cabinets. And we are in coalition with the ANC in Theewaterskloof municipality in the Western Cape, but we're also in coalition with the DA in Nelson Mandela Bay when we rescued Nelson Mandela Bay from the ANC by exiting a coalition with the ANC because we would not tolerate the maladministration that we were seeing. And we joined forces with the DA to form a government there.
And your personal opinion, do you think Patricia joining the cabinet was a good choice? It benefits your party?
It's not so much about our party. I mean, it's difficult for our party because as a cabinet minister, that's a really full-time job. And so, she has to find and carve out time in her ministerial work to do party work. So it's not about benefiting the party. But I mean, Patricia has a long experience in South African service. She must be one of, if not the only one, then a handful of people who were involved in the negotiations from apartheid to democracy. So she, her experience spans from 1992, 1994, that negotiation period. She served as a member of parliament. She served as a chairperson of the Transport Committee. She served in provincial government as an MEC. She served as the mayor of a major city. So she brings a lot of experience to the current role as minister. And she's there to clean up a department that, quite frankly, needed an independent minister to clean up. It's the same department that built in Kandla for Jacob Zuma, that rented office space for the police services in that Rue Shabangu scandal. So it's a department that is rife with corruption and maladministration. And she's there to serve the people of South Africa, not the ANC.
Brett, on that note, have you read the book A House Divided? I think the author is Crispian Oliver.
I've bought the book and I didn't finish it because I didn't find it very accurate.
Okay, and what was not accurate in that book? Okay, just for context for the viewers watching, Crispian lays out an argument against Patricia de Lille as mayor in Cape Town, that she was very authoritarian, that she consolidated a lot of power in the executive mayor position. That is the argument Crispian makes in this book. What did you find was not accurate?
Well, I think that the narrative was being told, and I could almost, but I won't name them, but I can identify who Crispian was talking to by the content of the report. I mean, Patricia was an executive mayor, and she used the powers that were delegated to her by the council, the same powers that Helen Zille had before her and Dan Plato before her, and had used the legislation that empowers, that gives executive mayors their power. So Patricia had no power other than the power given to her by council and the system of delegations and the legislation. And it's the same powers that previous mayors had, but maybe the previous mayors didn't use them in order to bring change for the poorest people of our city, or for those who were excluded through an apartheid spatial plan that relegates poor, mostly Black people to the outskirts of the city. So she wasn't accumulating powers that other mayors didn't have. She was just using the powers to benefit the people of Cape Town and to break down barriers. And there were people who didn't like it.
Crispian lays out a very interesting scene in this book, and obviously you will know if this is true or not, but he says there was a scene where Helen Zille and Patricia de Lille were together. They approached a township, or an area close to a township, and a property developer or someone like that was bidding for a housing development close to a township, or excuse me, to a white area. And Patricia de Lille and Helen Zille decided, no, that can't happen. We can't put a township or something like that close to a white area. That would frighten off our voters. He makes an argument like that the two spoke, and we can't have a township or something similar like that close to white voters. Is that something that happened?
I don't know about that. I didn't get that far into the book. As I say, I abandoned it because I thought I could read where the narrative and where he got most of his information from. But it doesn't sound like it could be true. Certainly not from Patricia's side, because when the fight started in the city when she launched the inner city housing project to bring affordable housing into Woodstock, Salt River, and into the inner city. So that was something that we launched in 2017, and which was continuously blocked until ultimately we left. And in that project, I was the champion of that project because I was for a short while responsible for urban development, which was a combination of spatial planning and housing and transport. And I was summoned to a DA donor who happened to be a property developer, where I was cross-examined about this project and whether I was going to create tent cities in the inner city, all kinds of absurd questions. And because I had been at this meeting with the property developer, I used to get the monthly reports as to what donation they made. And they never made a donation after that meeting. I got them every month. I got a report for the next 18 months. It was a meeting that the current mayor of Cape Town arranged, Jordan Hill-Lewis. He was still an MP. This is a donor that he managed. And they didn't donate a cent to the party during that whole time that we were there championing this inner city affordable housing project. 2 months after we left, Dan Plato cancelled the project. So I assume that the donation came through after that.
Interesting. Brett, is there such a thing as a construction mafia in Cape Town?
Well, I think that it depends on what we call a mafia. If we're talking about price fixing, so collusion around the cost of construction, I think that the building of the Cape Town Stadium proved that that did happen. There was a competition commission inquiry initiated and supported by Patricia, and in which people were found to have colluded. So from that perspective, there was a mafia. I don't know if it still exists. So there is collusion, or there was collusion around pricing. So if that's what you mean by a mafia, then certainly it did exist at the time of the construction of the Cape Town Stadium. There is gangsters. There are gangsters who sort of intimidate construction companies that have won tenders to build housing, for example, in communities. To the extent when I was responsible for housing, where a construction company that had won a tender decided they were not prepared to pursue the project because their lives and the lives of their staff were in danger. So there is also that.
I think Crispian in his book says not every person in real estate is a crook, but every crook is in real estate. Do you think that's true?
Well, I'm sure there are lots of crooks who are not in real estate. South Africa has an abundance of crooks, and they're in different kinds of businesses. But it was interesting. I did a master's degree in cities at the London School of Economics, and we had a module on urban corruption or municipal city corruption. And it's interesting how corruption works. It can work in cities, and I think I did see it in Cape Town. And you can see it in South Africa. And one of the ways, and it's a term that I'll never forget, is that land is the new currency for corruption. So you can sell land below market value, and your donor gives you a kickback because now they've got this wonderful piece of well-located land that has a higher value than what they paid for it. Or you can buy land that has low value as a city and overpay the price and still get a kickback from the seller. So I think in terms of real estate, whether all the people in real estate are crooks, I don't believe that's true. But certainly this lesson that I learned when I did this program, that land is the new currency for corruption, I can see it playing out in South Africa, and I certainly saw it playing out in Cape Town.
And again, on that note, does your party support expropriation without compensation?
Yes, we do. It is, as we've been arguing, already provided for in the Constitution. And in fact, the Constitutional Court already interpreted this at least 15 years ago in a case that was before it, that in certain circumstances, expropriation would be just and equitable without any compensation being paid. And so we do support expropriation without compensation as it is defined and constrained in the Constitution, and as it has been provided for in the current bill that was recently approved by Parliament and is still going through the further processes. There are circumstances in which expropriation without compensation would be just and equitable. And I would love to take journalists on a journey through Cape Town of the buildings and the properties, where it would probably be the only way in which justice can be achieved.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, Good is not in favor of changing the Constitution, just working within the parameters of the Constitution. Expropriating. Yeah. Okay.
And when the attempt to change the Constitution was brought before Parliament, we voted against it, because the Constitution, as it currently stands, provides for the circumstances in which expropriation without compensation would be just and equitable, and there was no need to change the Constitution. And changing the Constitution would be hugely destabilizing, and would unnecessarily cause division when it really is not necessary. The Constitution provides for the circumstances in which it would be equitable and fair, and the court has already heard a case at least 15 years ago, I think, in which the court said that there are circumstances in which compensation need not be paid, and that the Parliament must pass the legislation to give effect to that.
Brett, pivoting, what is your opinion of the public protector? I think she's still the public protector, Besiswe. I think you're part of the. Yeah. What is your opinion of her?
Look, I mean, I'm on that committee that's currently hearing evidence as to whether she has committed misconduct or is incompetent. So I can't express a personal opinion on her while we're in the middle of hearing evidence. The committee will resume its sittings next week, Tuesday, when the public protector will continue to present her case, I expect. So we've heard the evidence from of the misconduct from all the witnesses who came forward. We've heard that those witnesses being cross-examined, and now it's for the public protector to present her case. And I'm going to maintain an objective and open mind with regards to whether she committed misconduct or was incompetent. I can say that I have personally reported several matters to her. I've had 2 or 3 findings where the public protector did find that there was maladministration, for example, in the Western Cape Provincial Legislature or the Western Cape Provincial Cabinet. And that decision has been taken on review by the Premier of the Western Cape. So I found when I dealt with her that she dealt with my matters expeditiously and in my view fairly. But whether she's guilty of misconduct and incompetence as is currently being determined by the special committee, I have to wait and hear all the evidence first.
Yeah, she was also the public protector when she accused Helen Zille of misconduct when she made that tweet about colonialism. What is your opinion of that, and generally just of Helen Zille?
Well, I mean, the tweet that Helen sent out was wrong and insensitive to South Africans who suffered under colonialism or in the name of colonialism. I didn't read the report on the finding, but I know that the public protector found that Helen had breached her duties as the Premier because she tweeted that while she was still the Premier of the Western Cape, and that she has a duty to live by the spirit of the Constitution. As I understand it, Helen made a commitment to taking that finding on review, but I don't think that review proceeded because I haven't heard anything more. So, I can't comment on it. Helen undertook to take that finding by the public protector on review, but I don't think she followed through. But I think the tweet was wrong.
Wrong. Oh, can you specify precisely what do you mean with that? So, for example, there's no positive benefits from colonialism. That is wrong.
Well, I think it's wrong in the context of what, because first of all, it assumes that South Africa would not have developed the infrastructure or the systems without colonialism, and you can't make that assumption. First, and it assumes that South Africa did not have systems in place before colonialism arrived, and there were systems in place. If we're talking about the justice system, there was African customary law, and who says that colonial law is better than African customary law? So there's a whole lot of assumptions that you have to jump over to make the tweet or to come to the conclusion that South Africa benefited from colonialism because there were many people who died, and you have to weigh that up against what colonialism bequeathed us. And unfortunately, we're still suffering the consequences of colonialism. I'm here in the Overberg to help in a by-election, and our history has left Black or people of color still living in backyards, still living in shacks. So I think that the tweet was wrong because it makes a lot of assumptions, and those assumptions are unsustainable.
Brett, there was a recent by-election somewhere in Cape Town. I can't precisely remember the specific ward or location, but Good did very well in this specific place. Why do you think that happened? Why was the sudden rise in support for Good? What is Good doing right?
So that was an award in Yanga, one of the oldest black townships in Cape Town. As I said earlier, it was an ANC ward, so we contested hard against the ANC, and we did really, really well. We came second. We got 17% of the vote in an award that is entirely African black community, which tells us that there are no-go areas for good. We can convince voters in all communities to support us. And I think that what is happening in South African politics is that voters are tiring of the old parties. Both the ANC and the DA have had governing opportunities for decades, and people are seeing that their lives have not improved or changed at all under either an ANC government or a DA government. And Good is presenting credible alternatives, and we are appealing to communities, across the spectrum. So we are really encouraged by that support. I must say that we have shown growth in every by-election we've contested, other than one by-election in Ceres in April this year, which unfortunately we declined there. But we've contested about 15 by-elections, and in every one of them we've shown growth. And we're contesting 2 at the moment, one in Kensington in Cape Town, and one here in Struisbaai, which is why I'm sitting in the Overberg today.
So a lot of people in South Africa, they believe South Africa's going downhill, there's no more points. And they say, okay, but in the Western Cape, let's just secede. Let's declare Cape independence and let's go our own way. What does Brett and Good think about that?
So, I mean, look, South Africa is, as I was saying, has betrayed, I think, the ideals upon which we were building this democracy. People lost their lives and their limbs in trying to build a democracy, and what the state has provided has deteriorated rapidly since 1994, to where the point is where almost every service that you should be expecting to have improved for South Africans has declined. But I'm not ready to give up on Project South Africa. And I don't think that, and I wouldn't like to encourage South Africans to give up on that project. I think that what the state inherited was a hugely divided society, and in some respects we have made progress in uniting South Africa. Now we need to unite South Africa around fixing those things that don't work and building a country that works for everybody and which reduces unemployment and inequality. And I don't think that that can be achieved through any independence of a province. I think there are other problems with the Cape independence idea, and they're numerous. First of all, recently the Cape independence, I think, exposed that this is really about race when they tweeted out that the demographics of the Western Cape are changing rapidly due to urbanization, and therefore we must get Cape independence fast. So what they're basically saying is that the African people are moving to the Western Cape, and before they outnumber us, let's get independence. So that is a horrendous argument to make and a racist argument to make. Then I think, secondly, the problem is the Western Cape is really a line on a map. It was a negotiated province arising out of the 1994 negotiations. But it has no history. It has no history that gives it any unique demographic or any unique culture that one could perhaps argue that it is an independent state. The line was drawn. Previously, the Cape included the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape. So if you're going to start talking about the Cape, the Western Cape is a creation of 1994 negotiations, and it has no unique characteristics that justify it being an independent state.
It's interesting you mentioned that, but because the Cape independence people would argue South Africa, the same standard applies. South Africa is also just a line on the map. It was brought together in 1910 by the British. That's one of the reasons why they say, okay, but we should all go our separate way.
Well, I mean, the whole of Africa is lines on a map, because the colonialists, the ones that that you may, or you were arguing, as Helen was arguing, that there was some benefit from them. I mean, they met and they decided how they were going to divide up the continent of Africa. So the whole of the African continent are lines on a map drawn by colonialists and created countries by negotiation. And the French will take this one, and the Germans will take that one, and the English or the British will take that one. So the whole of Africa is a creation of colonialism, and carving up this great continent was decided by others. But from 1910, South Africa, was a union, and then ultimately a republic. It had 4 provinces. There were 4 colonies before that, and nothing good came out of that. What came out of colonialism, it migrated into apartheid. And what Cape Independence is trying to do is to bring a new kind of apartheid by isolating the Western Cape, which is really a creation of 1994 negotiations, far too recent for the Western to have any history that you can claim is unique to the people of the Western Cape, and therefore justifies us being a separate state.
But you say nothing good came out of it. I mean, the good party arose out of South Africa's problems. So there's one good thing that came out of it.
No, I'm saying nothing good came out of colonialism. So the lines on the map are the lines created by the colonialists right through Africa. And that's the point I was responding to, that, and nothing good came out of apartheid, and the 4 colonies coming together and creating a republic, because, then we attempted to create Bantustans, and then ultimately independent states, which no one recognized except South Africa, which were just attempts to push African Black people into small territories and segregate people. So it's the Cape Independence is a non-starter for us.
Yeah, no. I was just messing with you. That was a joke. But
I didn't get it.
Brett, is there a scenario in which you would consider Cape Independence? So, for example, I mean, some say, oh, if the ANC wins again in 2024, poof, I'm out of this country. I'm not staying again in this country. So, is there a scenario where you say, listen, we didn't like this idea, but I mean, if the ANC continues to govern beyond 2024, if there's, for example, Deputy President Julius Malema, okay, we have to revisit this idea.
No, I think that we have to. We were fighting for a democracy, for the Republic of South Africa. We got a democracy. If opposition parties are unable to mobilize voters to vote for them, opposition parties and those who support them need to reflect on why that is, and why we can't attract people to support us when we present sensible solutions for South Africa. And so Cape Independence is not the solution because the ANC won a democratic election. That just exposes, for me, racism. So I think that we need to, those of us in opposition who want to win the vote and to win elections, we need to reflect on why we can't attract a majority of voters to support us. For some parties, it's quite obvious why they can't do that. And they need to either adjust their policies or accept that they're going to be a minority niche party that will continue to represent their voters in a democratic South Africa, in which the ANC continues to hold the majority because the majority of the voters supported them.
Brett, what is your opinion of the Western Cape Devolution Working Group? What is Good's opinion of this?
Well, I think it's pointless. It's strange bedfellows. Parties who claim to be constitutionalists are sort of under the disguise of devolution, working towards independence, which is not what our constitution provides for. But I do think that there are functions that should be devolved, and not necessarily to provinces, but to towns and cities. By 2050, 80% of South Africans will be living in towns and cities. So people are urbanizing rapidly, and towns and cities need more power or more mandates to make sure that we prepare for that urbanization. So I support devolution of functions. When I was responsible for transport and for urban development, I championed for the devolution, certainly of transport functions. I think housing functions can be further developed, devolved to towns and cities. But if the devolution working group is a group that's trying to work towards independence, I think that we don't support. And I think we need to start looking at the role of provinces and whether they actually serve their function.
But on that point, why don't you join the devolution working group to balance things out? So it isn't a right-wing organization. I mean, if parties like Good join that devolution working group, you would balance things out, won't you not?
Well, we weren't invited to join. And I don't see that the devolution working group will achieve anything. But as I say, if you read our manifesto, our very first manifesto shortly after we were launched, you will see right up front that we talk about devolution of functions to towns and cities. So we're more interested in devolution to towns and cities, to urban devolution, which is where people will live and where they need to be serviced properly, and local government is best placed to deal with some of those functions. I think the devolution working group, in my view, is probably a waste of time. And we will continue to champion through our manifesto and through our campaigning for devolution of functions to towns and cities.
Brett, I forgot to ask you this question on the note of Cape Independence. It seems like polling shows that the majority of your supporters, the supporters of Good, supports Cape Independence. So how do you square that circle? It seems like the leadership doesn't want Cape Independence, but the voters of your party want Cape Independence.
Well, I don't know how reliable that poll was. I mean, when the polling was done, we were still a very new party, young party, small party in terms of voting numbers. So the polling, I think, is unreliable. But in any event, that's not the point. The point is, for when you're in political leadership, is to show leadership. And when people are, at home and asked a question, do you support this versus that? They may make a choice that they support something that the Good Party doesn't support. But overall, in the end of the day, our voters don't vote on one issue. They vote on the credibility of party leaders. They vote on credibility of the solutions. They vote on our values. And the fact that we don't support Cape Independence, I don't think is a deal breaker for our supporters. They just didn't hear our voice on it and the reasons why we don't support it.
Interesting. Okay, Brett, I recently hosted a debate in which the ACDP, it was a debate on colored issues, brown issues. And Mr. Furlong Christians, Dr. Furlong Christians from the ACDP was part of this debate. And he says that, I think the term is correct, unisex toilets. Unisex toilets are rape stations. That is his opinion. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's a simplistic argument to make, not backed by any facts. Rape is a very serious thing to play politics with. Gender-based violence is a very serious thing to play politics with. And to make that kind of claim without any evidence to support it is reckless and irresponsible, and is an assault on the work that we all have to do to eliminate rape and gender-based violence from our society. Most rape cases that are reported take place in people's homes where they live and are often perpetrated by people that they know. So to say that a unisex toilet is where rapes will take place or have taken place is unsustained by any evidence, and reckless and irresponsible. And I don't want to play politics with that kind of thing.
Are you in favor of unisex toilets in, for example, high schools and primary schools?
I have no issue with unisex toilets. I mean, unisex toilets are, if I eat out in restaurants, I'm often in a unisex toilet. It's a row of toilet stalls where you go in and you close the door and you lock it behind you. And you come out and you wash your hands, and these unisex toilets are not in the middle of a field where there's nobody watching and no one around. So I think it's silly to be even debating unisex toilets. Most of us have used unisex toilets. Most of us live in a house where there's 1 or 2 toilets and a number of genders who share those toilets. I think it's a stupid argument to be having. I've used unisex toilets that don't feel unsafe. And I have never met any woman who said that they feel unsafe in a unisex toilet. But I don't want to debate it because I think it's a stupid debate to have.
Sorry, yeah, I think terms are here important. There's probably a difference between a toilet and a bathroom, or a place where you can go to shower. So I think a lot of people are concerned, for example, in high schools and primary schools, if boys and girls are allowed to shower in the same room. Yeah,
I don't think that's the debate at all. I don't think anyone's proposing that. I think the proposal to have unisex toilets is a toilet. It's a row of toilets with stalls. I don't believe anyone who's talking about unisex bathrooms is talking about showering. And if Dr. Christians is trying to make that argument, then he's being dishonest, and he must take that back, because no one is talking about that.
Interesting. And I think on the issue of transgenderism, I think there's a recent law or a policy being considered that a person can, at the age of 13, I'm not very clued up on these facts. So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the age of 13, you can decide if you're a boy or a girl, if you want to go to an high school, or if you identify as a different sex. Do you think that's a positive thing? Do you think that's a negative thing?
I think it's a positive thing for the mental health of the individuals who identify with a gender that their body is not. So the mental health anguish and turmoil that those people have gone through in the past is well documented. And if people are able to identify at that age what their gender is, then I think it's a positive thing for mental health, and it's so I don't have any issue with the idea that at a certain age, and I don't know that there's a law. I don't know of any law that says this, but I know that around the world, countries and authorities are increasingly looking at recognizing that transgender issues are important issues, and that there should be space in the legal framework for people to identify their gender.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, Brent, you have a law degree, and law, there's a common principle that after 18, or at the age of 18, you acquire responsibility to make your own choices, and especially it's recognized in law. Don't you think it's a bit early to give that sort of power to someone at 13 to decide what sex he is without the consent of the parents involved? I mean, isn't that a bit dangerous? Because you're a very confused person at the age of 13 or 14.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know what laws you're talking about, because I don't think there is such a law. But I'm talking about the theory that people can identify their gender or their sexuality at a much earlier age than 18. And I think if all of us who've gone through adolescence will recognize that we are able to identify sexuality at a much earlier age, and gender probably at a much earlier age. And if you self-identify as transgender, or the gender that your body is not, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to change your body without your parents' consent. And I know families who are going through this with teenagers. So I have empathy for both the individual who identifies as transgender, or identifies as a gender that their physical body is not, and I have empathy with the families that have to deal with it. But I don't think there's a law that says at age 13 you can change your gender. But I think we must, all of us who are adults and who've been through adolescence and puberty, will acknowledge that sexuality and gender issues arise long before 18, which is an arbitrary date for when adulthood is.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, Brett, my last question to you. This has been an awesome interview, a very unique perspective. I love this discussion. My last question to you is, in the event of a coalition in 2024, what would good do to help it succeed? What would good bring to the party, to the coalition, whatever coalition there is, to make South Africa work? What advice? How would you make it work?
So I think there are a couple of strengths that we bring. First of all, many in our leadership have been in coalitions. So I served myself as a member of a coalition in Cape Town when I was a member of the ID, and we were in coalition with the DA before we merged. And so there's a lot of experience in managing coalitions and what works and what doesn't. We have a lot of experience on our bench in governing. And currently, we are part of coalitions either which are led by the ANC or led by the DA, and so we bring that experience. And what I think we've demonstrated in how we've entered coalitions is that, first of all, we don't ever enter coalition for the sake of power. We enter coalitions to bring stability to the municipality, and in the next election to the province or the national government, we would do so to bring stability. And we also will not pursue power at the expense of our values and our principles and the promises and commitments we've made to the people that elected us. So when we exited the ANC-led coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay, it was because the ANC-led coalition, or the ANC in itself, was breaching its agreements with us around good governance, around the appointment of a municipal manager, around the way that municipality was being governed. And we were not prepared to drag our voters and our supporters down a path of maladministration, and the people of the Nelson Mandela Bay were not properly served. So what I'm saying is that we bring principles and values and experience that I think would be very, very valuable to stable government and to making progress with the people who are often left behind.
Great. And Brett, before I conclude, is there anything you would like to leave our viewers with? Any last message?
I hope that when you edit this, you will explain why my video has suddenly gone weird, that in the middle of load shedding, I had to switch devices, and that I'm now currently holding a tablet on top of books, trying to replicate the video from my laptop. But I would like to say to the people that watch that we're going through a very challenging time in South Africa. It's going to be a turbulent 2023 as we head towards the 2024 elections. There's going to be a lot of political grandstanding, and I hope that South Africans will keep the faith that South Africa can be rescued from this downward spiral, and that the way to rescue it is to exercise your vote. For those people who choose not to vote because they've given up on politics, I ask them to look beyond the old parties and to look at the new parties, and to look at what we're offering and the commitments we make, and to give us an opportunity to demonstrate that South Africa does not need to continue down this path that we're on, and which suits the old parties. This kind of flying in formation between the ANC and the DA suits both parties, suits the ANC not to have a very strong official opposition, and suits the official opposition to govern in the Western Cape and have no real ambitions to do so beyond that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brett. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, don't worry, we'll sort all of this out in the editing process. Yeah, good luck with the by-election.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Same to you.